The Book of Esther is all about a man who hates the Jewish people and schemes to kill them. He achieves a high position in the government of Persia and uses that position to enact a decree to kill all the Jews. When the queen, herself a Jew, finds out about the decree, she approaches the king, exposes the man who wants to kill her and all her people, and gets a new decree signed, allowing the Jews to fight back. On that fateful day, the Jews triumph overwhelmingly and defeat those who come against them. The Book of Esther is replete with patterns and repeating numbers. We're going to take a look at some of these interesting prophetic patterns. I'm Brenda Cathcart, and this is Shadows of the Messiah. One of the themes of this book is that things that are hidden will be revealed. Mordecai reveals a plot to kill the king. Esther reveals Haman's hidden agenda. Esther and Mordecai's hidden identity is revealed. This pattern points to the revelation of another hidden character in the account. God's actions behind the scenes are hidden. God's name is not even mentioned in the Book of Esther, yet his hand is evident throughout as events just happen to occur, leading to the exposure of Haman and the subsequent redemption of the Jewish people. One of the hidden patterns of the Book of Esther is the appearance of duels. A detail will be mentioned twice, an event will happen twice, or an event will occur that is parallel to another event. Some of the examples of these duels are the lists of the king's servants, 2 reports that Esther concealed her identity, 2 houses for the women, and 2 references to the death of Haman's sons. Through these duels, the number 2 is hidden or embedded into the account. But what is the significance of this? What is the significance of the number 2? Well, 2 is the number of differentiation. Take these examples. God separated darkness from the light on the 2nd day of creation. Yeshua the Son comes twice. In Yeshua's first coming, he dies and is resurrected, ensuring life for those who believe in him. He separates life from death. In his second coming, he comes with the 2-edged sword to judge the nations. Look at Revelation 1:16. He had in his right hand 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword, and his countenance was like the sun shining in its strength. Also, Hebrews 4:12. For the word of God is living and powerful, and sharper than any 2-edged sword, piercing even to the division of soul and spirit, of joints and marrow, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. Yeshua, the living word, differentiates between those who are his and those who are destined for death. So throughout the Book of Esther, there is a hidden theme of a ruler coming who will rule in righteousness and justice. And this ruler himself is hidden until the end. So where is it that we see this theme in the Book of Esther? And what does it tell us about the coming of Yeshua? Well, we find this theme in the patterns. One of these patterns is the pattern of duels. It's in the pairing of the 10 banquets in the book. 10 is the number of perfection, of divine order. It signifies a complete cycle or the whole of something. In this case, we will see that it represents the completion of the cycle of the exaltation of man above God, which began when Adam and Eve chose to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and become like God. It continued through Nimrod, who led the building of the Tower of Babel to reach the heavens. So the 2 banquets are, number 1, the king's banquet to begin the 180-day display of his wealth and his power. Number 2, the king's 7-day banquet at the end of the 180-day display of wealth and power. Number 3, Queen Vashti's banquet for the women. Number 4, the banquet given in honor of Esther being made queen. Number 5, the private banquet between Haman and the king at the signing of the decree to kill all the Jews. Number 6, the first banquet Esther gave for the king and Haman. Number 7, The second banquet Esther gave for the king and Haman, during which she denounces Haman. Number 8, the public banquet given to elevate Mordecai to the rank of second only to the king. Number 9, the banquet celebrating Jewish victory in the provinces. And finally, number 10, the banquet celebrating Jewish victory in Shushan. The first two banquets serve to exalt the king, Esther 1, 3, and 4. That in the 3rd year of his reign he made a feast for all his officials and servants, the powers of Persia and Media, the nobles, and the princes of the provinces being before him, when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom, and the splendor of his excellent majesty for many days, 180 days in all. When we add the length of the 7-day feast that followed this 180-day display, the entire period of 187 days is the same interval between Passover, the first feast of the Lord, to the end of the 8th day that concludes the Feast of Tabernacles, the last feast of the Lord. During his 187 days, King Ahasuerus exalts himself. In contrast, Passover demonstrates the humble character of God, who through his son Yeshua died on the cross to bring salvation to mankind. Paul writes in Philippians 2, 6 through 9, that Yeshua, who being in the form of God did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant, coming in the likeness of men, and being found in the appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross. Therefore God also has highly exalted him and given him the name which is above every name. The Feast of Tabernacles, the final feast of the Lord, celebrates Yeshua's return, when God will finally and forever dwell with man. It is the wedding feast of the Lamb, where the bride and the groom feast and celebrate together. One of the things we notice about the king of Persia's 7-day banquet at the end of the 180 days is that the queen is not there. The bride is missing. She is busy holding her own separate feast. In this scenario, the wife of the king remains rebellious against the king, reminding us of mankind's rebellion against God. Esther 1, 10 and 11. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing her royal crown, in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold. And skipping down to verses 13 and 14, then the king said to the wise men who understood the times, for this was the king's manner toward all who knew law and justice, those closest to him being Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who had access to the king's presence and who ranked highest in the kingdom. So the king called for Vashti on the 7th day of the feast. And for those of you who are familiar with the Feast of Tabernacles, you know that the 7th day is called Hoshana Rabbah, the Great 7th. This last day of the feast is celebrated with more joy, enthusiasm, and extended ceremonies than the previous 6 days. Also notice the preponderance of the number 7. 7 is the number of spiritual completion. It points to the ultimate Sabbath or 7th day rest, when Yeshua will rule and reign from Jerusalem with perfect justice and righteousness. So hidden behind the king's feast exalting mankind is the promise of the coming of the king, who rules under the authority of God and exalts God. Notice that King Ahasuerus is advised by 7 princes who supposedly understand the times and are wise in matters of the law and justice. When Yeshua reigns, the 7 spirits of the Lord are before him. Revelation 1:4. John to the 7 churches which are in Asia, grace to you and peace from him who is, and who was, and who is to come, and from the 7 spirits who are before his throne. And Zechariah 4:2. And he said to me, what do you see? And I said, I am looking, and there's a lampstand of solid gold with a bowl on top of it, and on the stand 7 lamps with 7 pipes to the 7 lamps. Zechariah goes on to explain that the 7 lamps are the 7 spirits of God. Isaiah also writes about the 7 spirits of God. Take a look here at Isaiah 11:1-4. There shall come forth a rod from the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord. His delight is in the fear of the Lord, and he shall not judge by the sight of his eyes, nor decide by the hearing of his ears. But with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. He shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall slay the wicked. So Yeshua is advised by the Spirit of the Lord, who truly understands the times, and is wise in matters of law and justice. Vashti, attending her own feast, reminds us of Yeshua's parable of the ruler, whose guests he invited for his son's wedding can't be bothered to show up for the wedding. Matthew 22:8-9. Then he said to his servants, the wedding is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy. Therefore go into the highways, and as many as you find, invite to the wedding. Vashti, as the bride, is not ready or willing. She doesn't show up for the banquet. But Esther is a type of bride who has made herself ready. The banquet Vashti holds has its dual in the banquet the king holds for Esther. Esther 2:16-18. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebet, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. So he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king made a great feast, and the feast of Esther, for all his officials and servants, and he proclaimed a holiday in the provinces, and gave gifts according to the generosity of a king. The 5th banquet is a private banquet with just Haman and the king, as they celebrate the signing of the decree to kill the Jews. Esther 3:15. The couriers went out, hastened by the king's command, and the decree was proclaimed in Shushan the citadel. So the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was perplexed. The identity of the villain Haman is hidden from public view. The public is confused and bewildered about this decree. The dual for this banquet is the 8th banquet, a public banquet elevating Mordecai to a position of authority. The feast that Queen Esther gave for the king and Haman fall between these 2 feasts. During the course of these 2 banquets hosted by Esther, Haman falls from his favored position and is executed. Mordecai goes from obscurity to second in command. During this time, the king discovers that Mordecai had exposed a plot to kill him, but had not been rewarded for that act. So to begin Haman's humiliation and Mordecai's exaltation, Haman is the one who is selected to clothe Mordecai in the king's robe, and to place him on the king's horse and parade him through the streets of Shushan, proclaiming that the king delights in Mordecai. Esther 6:11. So Haman took the robe and the horse and arrayed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city square and proclaimed before him, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." After Haman is executed, Mordecai is appointed in his place, and he rises to an even higher honor, that of second only to the king. Mordecai is clothed in the garments of royalty and given a golden crown. His identity is open and revealed for all to see, and a feast is held in his honor. Esther 8:15 through 17. So Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, with a great crown of gold, and a garment of fine linen and purple, and the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness, joy and honor. And in every province and city, wherever the king's command and decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a holiday. Then many of the people of the land became Jews, because fear of the Jews fell upon them. The last two banquets of the book are together duels of the first two banquets. In these last two banquets, the Jewish people celebrate their victory over their enemies. But instead of exalting their power, they refuse to take the plunder from their enemies, and instead they give gifts to the poor. Esther 9:16 through 22. The remainder of the Jews in the king's provinces gathered together, protected their lives, had rest from their enemies, and killed 75,000 of their enemies, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. This was on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day of the month they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews who were at Shushan assembled together on the 13th day, as well as on the 14th, and on the 15th day of the month they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages who dwelt in the unwalled towns celebrated the 14th day of the month of Adar with gladness and feasting as a holiday, and for sending presents to one another. And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters to all the Jews near and far who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, to establish among them that they should celebrate yearly the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, as the days on which the Jews had rest from their enemies, as the month which was turned from sorrow to joy for them, and from mourning to a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and joys, of sending presents to one another and gifts to the poor. The feast days were held as days of rest, joy, gladness, and generosity. Their sorrows were turned to joy. When Yeshua reigns, and when we enter into his rest, all of our sorrow will turn to gladness. Isaiah 35:10. And the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing, with everlasting joy on their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. And in Revelation 21:4 it says, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. It is with this same great joy and gladness that we can join our Jewish brothers and sisters in celebrating the festival of Purim, anticipating and rehearsing for that great day when there will be no more pain and the former things have passed away. I'm Brenda Cathcart. This has been Shadows of the Messiah. Shalom and be blessed.